is the language that everybody's speaking? That is kind of funny. All right. I really appreciate you folks showing up today. This is great. Very nice to have you here. Next week, we're also going to be meeting on Thursday. And then after that, our meeting time is going to be Tuesday night for the rest of the semester. It was all supposed to be Tuesday night, but I had screwed up my schedule. So I wasn't able to do that for these first 2 weeks. And tonight, I wanted to, I hope you guys were able to do some reading and stuff and look through the beginning stuff of the class, go through the syllabus, all that kind of stuff. Tonight, we're going to talk about some of uh, the ways the class is organized. One of the principal or one of the founding principles for the way that we do critique in this class and how everything works. And then we're going to go into the body of this week's lesson or lecture or ramble, whatever. Oh, hi, Lily. I wanted to share a little bit about me at the beginning. I think there is like a module where, yeah, the introduction module. I do talk a little bit about who I am. Oh, good. There's even a photo there. All right. And then we'll talk about what we're doing this first week, and I'll try to describe what the general um, lessons are. Not general lessons, what the assignments look like generally. One of the things that I found is helpful for a lot of people, but a couple people get really, really frustrated. This class, there's a couple things in this class. Hopefully all of you read the turn-in policy. I put that there in case I have jerks in the class. The reality is, if you guys had a normal schedule, normal lives, if you're normal people, you'd be able to take classes in the school, at regular times, and be able to be with other human beings. The fact is, you're taking an online class because your schedule's messy. Things are not incredibly uh, clean cut for you. And so if we were meeting together, we'd be meeting twice a week. We'd have a lot of time to interact with each other, and you could fill me in on stuff. You'd be on top of things, and you'd also have a regular schedule. Since we're not, um, I want you to know the turn-in times, the due dates are there so that Canvas can trigger you and let you know that things are coming up. And it's really kind of dangerous to fall too far behind. But the reality is, the due dates are pretty fluid. So if something happens, you're not able to turn stuff in, you can let me know. Turn it in a couple days late, whatever. That is totally fine. But also, if we were in a regular class, we would be having a lot of back and forth. You'd ask questions, we'd answer them, stuff like that. If any of the assignments you get fewer than the points you want to get, uh, I expect you to look at the notes that I make and then make the improvements and turn it back in. There is absolutely no reason that all of you can't get a perfect score at the end of the term if you look at the assignment, look at what I wrote if you didn't get a perfect score, and then just turn around and fix it and resubmit it. I know that a lot of people don't do that, but in my mind, we've kind of got to do that and be more flexible with an online class, simply because you're not in a situation where you do have a regular schedule. I have had occasional people that manifest themselves as being extraordinarily entitled, and they don't know how to interact correctly with people. That hasn't happened an awful lot here, but I'm sure all of you know people like that in your friend circle. what I have experienced with here at Utah Tech is that you guys are extraordinarily professional as students, and if something does happen, you let me know consistently, and I'm happy to work with you and make things so that you can be successful. I'll do whatever I need to so you can get your stuff done and be successful in this class. And it actually takes less energy to be polite than otherwise, and so there's absolutely no reason that we can't be kind to each other and polite to each other. So keep that in mind. If you're upset because I screwed up and graded the incorrect assignment, just let me know. Just say, hey, it looks like you graded this for this other assignment, and that's not what I turned in. And whenever that's happened, people have been very, very kind with me, and I'm able to fix it right away. It is a little. I know that you've dealt with people where it's a little bit more difficult to return kindness when somebody's being rude, and so I think all of us, if we can try really hard to avoid that, it will really help. If you are attending live and you have the capacity, I'd really appreciate it if you could turn on your camera. If if not, that's fine too, but if you can turn on your camera, I'd really appreciate it. Okay. So after I said all that, is that all right with you guys? Everything that I said? Okay. Now, if you are jogging and you're listening to this on your phone, please do not turn on your camera because all of us will get motion sick. That'd be kind of funny until somebody starts throwing up on the screen. Okay, I'm going to share. This is what my screen looks like. I wanted to tell you a little bit about me. I do teach art history here at Utah Tech. I'm not entirely an art historian. I'm more of a studio artist, but my experience is very extraordinarily varied. I started off as an architect in architecture and engineering. I moved into stained glass, went through the arts, and I have been both of my BFA and my MFA are both from BYU in sculptural stained glass. I worked with Brian Christensen to build the hot shot program, the glass blowing program at BYU about 20 years ago. But I've also studied lots of world religions. I'm a chaplain. I'm an interfaith chaplain. I work with the LDS Church when they open up a temple in Salt Lake, or not Salt Lake, I'm sorry. When they open up a temple in Utah, a lot of the times they will have me come with the interfaith crowd for the open house so that I can find points of connection between the different faiths. I've also, in addition to BYU, I also have studied at universities in Iran and the country Jordan. Um, uh, so I've done a lot of different things. I've worked as a stained glass designer and artist. I've worked on maybe about 60 LDS temples, but I've also worked on several Catholic and Anglican churches and lots of other religious structures, as well as a couple thousand homes. I do traditional arts. That means I bookbinding, bronze casting, paper making, ink making, different things like that. I've studied sacred geometry and lots of other things. So it's my kids tell me I have a brain like a pachinko machine. There's lots and lots of stuff rattling around. So if we are talking, the point of all that is that I love it when we have a new group of people. We have people with several different backgrounds and several different majors. And I love that because you can tell myself I sleep maybe 4 or 5 hours a night and I read an awful lot. in a lot of different things. And even though there's a lot of information rattling around, you'll notice sometimes that in the lectures, you'll realize that when I'm talking, it's not that I'm not entirely making sense. It's more that I've been having like 3 other conversations in my head, and you guys are only listening to 1 out of the 3. I've already heard the answers I imagine you've given me. And so if that happens, please, I would not mind. I would actually appreciate it if you'd rein me in a little bit. Sometimes it gets a little crazy. I'm going to try to cover some things as fast as I can. Hopefully, you guys will stop me and ask questions after we cover different sections. But let me share this with you. There are a couple of things that I want you to be really aware of this week, and you're going to have to apply one of them right away, and then next week apply the other one. I'm going to share my screen again here. Okay, in this first section, we go down. The who are you? People have been pretty good. You guys have been filling that out. You get full points after you fill out your own information, as well as comment on 3 other people's. You know, as soon as you do that, then you get all the points. If you upload like a 1 to 2 minute video of yourself introducing yourself, you get extra credit points. Okay. So that's this assignment, full points when you introduce yourself, following the prompts, as well as comment on 3 other people. And remember too that it actually takes less energy to be positive than it does to be negative. So when you make comments, it doesn't hurt at all to be positive in them. I am a master of sarcasm, and I really do enjoy sarcasm. But when we first introduce ourselves, that's really not the place for it. If we're in, if we can see each other's faces and interact with each other in person, then we can read the cues to enjoy the sarcasm. But please do not use that as you introduce or react to other people. Now, in this, the brief introduction to the tools of artistic critique, I want to talk about that in just a second. The 4 tools of artistic critique, and I want to talk about the challenge moving forward. There are 2 major kinds of assignments that we're going to have through the semester. I do not like quizzes. I do not like tests. We are not going to be doing that. Instead, what we are doing as our assessment that's been approved by the university is that every week you're going to have a weekly reflection, and every couple of weeks you're going to do a research and discovery project. And we will talk about these a lot more next week. But I want you right away to look at these. The project ideas, we'll talk about this more next week. Don't really worry about that. You'll notice that this is due January 26th. That's when the first one is due. And so, like I said, we're going to talk more about it next week, and then move into doing them. And you'll see that there's about every 2 weeks is going to be one due, just about. And then at the very end, your final, towards the end of the semester, you're going to do another project. And we'll talk about more about those in just a second. Well, you'll notice that every week we have a weekly reflection due. And the weekly reflection is an opportunity for you to apply critique to one of the elements that we discussed in that module. And there's a word count on it that's required, but you can also do this, not just writing, you can also record yourself talking about it. And it does follow a specific format. We'll look at that in just a second. In it, I refer to the 4 tools of artistic critique. I'm going to open this right now. Most of the time when people hear the word critique or critical or criticism, it has a negative connotation. And I want to talk about that for just a second. What is critical thinking? Does anybody know what critical thinking is?
Um, isn't it just basically like you're trying to make sure that like an argument or something follows a certain order, like it's logical?
Yeah, you are in essence exactly right, Derek. You are in essence controlling your thinking. Um, at any given point in time, we are impacted with millions of points of information. We have a tiny little organ in our brain that's about the size of 2/3 of your pinky, called the reticular activating system. And like I said, at any instant during the day, there are at least 500,000 to 2 million bits of information coming into your brain. That reticular activating system narrows it down, weeds it down to 20 to 30. That way your brain doesn't get overwhelmed. In the same way, critical thinking pushes away the fluff of your mind, because our brains constantly are going, and critical thinking demonstrates thinking with intention. So we need to apply that to the idea of critique. Critique is not everybody telling you, well, you did a lousy job. That has nothing to do with critique. And I think it's awful when people do that and claim they're just doing constructive critique. No, they're not. They're trying to tear you down. And they may not think that. They honestly may not think that, but that's what's going on. The tools of artistic critique that I want to tell you is a way of organizing your thoughts. So when you talk about artwork or talk about something, you're talking about it on purpose, and which is what means. Critical means on purpose and with intent. So these four tools are: first, description. You're just talking about the object as it presents itself. You're describing the colors, the size, the lines in it, talking about the materials that you see that were used, where it is in the home, for example, if it's in a house, where it is if it's not in a home, maybe where it was originally intended to be used. But you're just talking about how the object manifests itself in the environment that we share. That's all. And look at these questions. And you can, when you're coming to something, when you're doing your first critique, don't ask these questions out loud, ask them in your head, and then answer them as you write about it. The second tool is analysis. This is where you look at the object and you start to guess what people did to get that to look the way it is. This is where you start guessing. Did the person carve it? Did they paint it? Did they paint it with brushes that were really fine? Or did they paint it by dipping sticks into something or putting dye in their mouth and spitting on something? How do they actually make it? Is it a pot that's thrown on a wheel? Or is it a pot that's made by pinching the clay? The analysis gives you an opportunity to use your imagination and extrapolate how the things that you see in the description area are made the way that you see them. And the third step is interpretation. This is where you start developing in your mind an archon or an avatar of the artist or the originator of the object that we were looking at. And this is how you start asking yourself, is there anything that can demonstrate what this person's worldview is? Is there anything that can demonstrate what this person's intention was? What kind of environment was this person living in? Is this object a result of a society as a whole or a specific somebody trying to make a statement? And what is that statement? Whether or not you're right or wrong, and we'll talk about that in another time, is to what the artist intended doesn't make any difference really, because the artist is communicating with you, and this interpretation is a manifestation of your imagination dovetailing with what the artist has presented. And again, you ask these questions in your mind and just answer them out loud or in your writing. For the evaluation, comes at the very end, and this is when you ask yourself questions like, is this thing worthwhile? How much is it worth? Did it meet the needs of the people that used it? Is it successful? That's where you ask this. One thing that you'll notice is that As you go through this, you apply more and more of yourself, your imagination, your ability to extrapolate to each of these 4 steps. The first one, you're not really using your imagination. You're just talking about what you see, what you experience. The second one, you apply a little bit more of your imagination, trying to figure out and apply your own life experience to how did the people make this? Was it woven? Was it sewn? And you are using a little bit more of your imagination to extrapolate how something was made. In interpretation, again, you're applying even more of your imagination because now you're kind of generating an imaginary perspective of who this artist might be, not as evidenced necessarily by the person because you may not ever meet them, but by what evidence that they have left behind. And so you're applying even more of your imagination. And then this evaluation, that is entirely your own personal judgment on this thing. But what's interesting, by the time you get here and evaluate it, if anybody asks you, why do you think that's good or why do you think that's bad, you will have all the vocabulary and evidence to support your opinion. And so now it becomes an educated opinion. Does that make sense to people going through that process? And I want to show you what a typical reflection is going to look like. Or I'm sorry, what the call out for the reflection is. Let's see. I am sucking on medicinal candy because I have a dry throat and I'm coughing a lot when I speak. And I could, well, no, it's not candy at all. It's entirely medicinal. It just happens to taste really good. Okay, so keep this in mind. This is how we'll do the reflection. You're going to pick an item that we've looked at. It could be a painting, it could be a sculpture, it could be a drawing, it could be a piece of furniture, or it could be a building, or it could be some of the ideas you're presented with, like a worldview. And if it's something that is less tangible, like a worldview, you can still apply those 4 tools. The first one, you would describe what the worldview, what the symbol, what the meaning is behind what the people are talking about. Then you would analyze, maybe guess, how did they get there? How did they get to that idea? Then in the interpretation, what would that idea mean reflected in their lives that they live? And then the last, is it successful? Well, it really depends. If when we get to talking about Italian futurism, the entire point behind the movement was to kill everybody that felt that still had their ethics rooted in the 19th century. And so all of the artists and writers and engineers, designers, are part of the Italian futurism movement, got heavily involved with World War I with the intent of killing everybody that disagreed with them. 99% of them died in World War I. And so was the movement successful? No, they all died. You know, it demonstrated that the violence is not, violence may resolve an immediate problem, but violence taken to this extreme will not solve ideological problems. All we'll do is get rid of the people that disagree with you and most likely get rid of you yourself as well. But so you can apply this to the ideas that we come across as well. But you'll go through and find the images that we used in the module, or find images on Wikimedia. Has a lot of free images that you can use. You find something like that there. And what you'll do is prepare either a paper or a video. There we go. You'll prepare either a paper or a video, hi Jen, that follows these rules, where you're demonstrating the 4 tools of artistic critique. The word count is really important, and then following this is really important. And I would even recommend at the head of, if you're writing this, at the head of each section, you write describe and then either put it in bold or underline it, and then write 75 words or so about, where you're answering those questions. Do the same thing with the analyze section, do the same thing with the interpret section, do the same thing with the evaluation section. If you want to do this as a video, what you would do, the easiest way to do this is to record yourself on a Teams meeting to yourself, where you have the screen share function like I just have on, and you're showing the artwork front and center, and then you just go through and you say out loud the answers to those questions that you saw on that page. And for the written, it needs to be 300 words long. For the video, it needs to be about 3 minutes. You can go a little bit longer. If you go longer than 10 minutes, you will get an F and fail it utterly. So don't go longer than 10 minutes. I say that because I had one person, I had a class at UVU I was teaching. There was one individual that just got back from a trip to New York, and then she was blathering on about one of the museums she went to. Her, and I'm not joking about this, her artistic critique of that museum lasted for 34 minutes. Unless you guys love being in a dentist or medical office waiting for, an hour and a half for the doctor, nobody wants to sit through a 34-minute presentation. Or at least I hope you don't. And there are some I have actually a list of 10 citation websites. And so when you do this, if you are just talking from your own perspective, you do not need to have a citation page. You're going to make this with images that come from the module. But if you do want to bring in something, or you're talking about something outside and you want to make a reference, then you need to include the correct citation style, which is MLA format. And there are several. Like I said, there's 10 different websites, and I'll show you how to find that really quick, where you can just plug in the URL and it will give you a correct MLA format. And at the end of that, you'll need to write the accessed on with the date line at the end of your citation and put them in alphabetical order. And we'll talk more about that next week too. Again, I want everybody to do this. If it's not right and you don't get full points, I'll explain why. You go back over and redo it and resubmit it to get perfect points. And that's what I want to have happen. And we'll even go through a couple of the early ones so everybody can see how it's done moving forward. The first couple can be intimidating, but after that, they go really fast. And here's what a sample layout might be, where I'm just writing, this week we viewed propaganda art from the space race era of the 1960s. And what I showed were stamps that we looked at. And this is hypothetical. This doesn't have anything to do with our actual class. And then I write underneath kind of, what is this? If it's directly from the module, you don't need to include this. If you found the image from Wikimedia, you can just write these little lines, with the URLs for the image from Wikimedia, and that's fine. Within the first section, description, and then I use my big girl words to write everything down and describe it all. And then analysis, do the same kind of thing. Interpretation, same kind of thing. Evaluation, same kind of thing. And then any final thoughts if needed. And at the very end, only if needed, the citations. All right. Now, does that make sense to everybody? If you don't need to use outside sources and you're just doing your own opinion, that is totally fine. You don't need to use citations. If you want to use citations, that's fine. But if you do, they need to be correctly formatted. And what I'm hoping is that as people turn these in, the first couple, we can go through the class and say, okay, this is what this one is missing. This is what we need. Because, well, one of my favorite philosophers is a guy named Heidegger, kindest and gentlest of the Nazi philosophers. But one of the things that he talks about is the moment that we start using language and the moment that we've chosen to use specific words, we've blocked out all the other possible words we could have used. What that means is inherent in the process of communication is also the parallel process of miscommunication. So I think that I've made it really clear. But by seeing a couple early examples, going through that in front of everybody so we can kind of see how to fix it, that helps everybody to learn, because that helps to cover the information that I communicated poorly. So I'm hoping you guys don't mind doing that. Excuse me. All right, let's see. I'm scaling because I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing next, and I did. Give me a short 17, 20 minutes to find how to share the screen again. All right, here we go. Now let's get us to the next step, the challenge moving forward. So I talked about how we're doing the weekly reflections every week. We're going to be doing several projects moving forward. And these projects, we're going to talk about this next week as well, a little bit more tightly. But the projects are focusing on something that you came across in one of the modules, or that you got interested because you saw the module title, and then spending 3 to 5 hours doing either a research project about it or a discovery project. And the difference is, a research one is you do just straight research, and the discovery is you reproduce it. And you don't have to be an artist to reproduce it. I've had you don't have to be a painter to reproduce. I had one person who reproduced a painting for a Renaissance class by pulling out all the clothes out of hers and a couple other people's closets, and then on the ground she laid the clothes out so that the colors and everything lined up with this actual painting. And it was really fascinating. She's not a painter, she's not a quilter, but doing that, it really helped her to understand the painting more and appreciate it more. But it was just cool to see. I also had somebody else who found, actually a couple people, who found images of something called the tea pie in paintings during the Baroque era. And so they actually did some research and found Baroque era recipes for making a tea flavored pie. One was very successful. The family loved it. The other one, the guy said it was the worst tasting thing he ever experienced. So it really depends. And so what ties that to the class as a discovery project is he found an image of a pie in a painting from a time period that was within the scope of the class, and then reproduced the pie itself. And that's kind of fun. That's a lot of fun. Now, in order to get this started, what I've done is kind of given some guidelines for how you, what kind of projects you can do. Here's some videos to help come up with some ideas. And then the assignment is to follow this model and create a proposal for a project. And like I said, it can be a research one, and research ones you can do, and I give more information about it when you look at it, but the research ones you can do as an annotated bibliography, as an essay that includes 8 images inside the body of an essay, or like a discovery, you can do something that is reminiscent. Like when we get in several weeks, we'll get to the 60s, where we'll talk about conceptual art, and maybe what you want to do is experiment with conceptual art, because that sounds really interesting. So there's lots of different kinds of things that you can do. What I also would like you to look at, so that's what this little section here is. If you go here to research and discovery projects, go down to project ideas submitted by the class. This is lots and lots of ideas from different people. And as people are turning in their ideas on that assignment, what I've been doing is putting them in here at the top. And then underneath this dashed line is ideas from previous classes. There's a lot of ideas there. And what I'm going to do is I will kind of format this a little bit. And then as we get more people turning in ideas, I'll erase all this other extra stuff so you don't have a whole bunch to go through. But the main focus on the project. Again, we'll talk more about this next week. That whatever you do has to be tied directly to the course material and time frame of this class. So since this is a class that deals with 20th century art, something where you're focusing on cave painting and reproducing cave painting is not going to work because that does not apply directly to this class. Again, we're going to talk more about that next week, but I want you guys to look at those assignments in the introduction module. Do as much as you can. When you have questions, like I said, we're going to talk more about it next week. All right. Even if, and Jen came late, but I want you to know that even when there are the due dates there, those are things to help us all keep on track. And if you miss them, or if I need to change them, that's totally fine. And again, after the due date, I will put a 0 on the thing, but all that means, all that is there to do is to remind Canvas to tell you that an assignment is missing. And when you submit it, then I'll replace the 0 with your grade. All right. So everything is always redeemable. Everything is always changeable. And again, if you get like 20 out of 25 points and you look down and I said, hey, this is great, but you're missing an image, you go back, insert an image into your paper, return it in, and you get the full points. All right. Does that make sense to everybody? Do you guys understand? Okay. All right. Now we are going to go into, I think that's the background stuff that I wanted to cover. And then we're going to go through some of this stuff pretty quickly. I wish we had 2 hours. I wanted to keep it to an hour and a half so you guys can watch it, but I also expect you to go through and watch all the videos on these things as much as you possibly can stomach, each week, and look at as many of the articles as you can, but try to absorb as much of that information as possible. Like I said, our assessments, my goal is to make sure that everybody can succeed. My goal is not to catch you on anything. And I do not like taking tests. They make me nervous. And so that's why our assessments are the weekly reflections instead of having a quiz every week, and the 6 projects and a final capstone project at the end of the term that kind of test you on the material that you've encountered and learned. And I know that some people are not going to like that, but it's interesting to me because particularly people that don't fit into the traditional idealized student model, which is, most normal people, they seem to respond better to the flexibility of the projects and the weekly reflections. And it's just, since I want you guys to succeed, I want to make this as accessible, I want to make success in this class as accessible as possible. And that's why we're doing these things instead of tests and quizzes. I hope that's okay with you. Excuse me. Do we have any questions before we move on? I know this is a lot of information. I want you guys to go through that stuff and read it yourself as well. And then hopefully you get more questions next week. But any questions before we move on?
I have a quick one. Where is the best place to find images for our weekly reflection? Like, where can we find images to kind of, put in our reflection?
Well, first, if there's an image in a video or an image in the module, use a program like Snip and just do a screenshot and then edit it down so you just see the little image. Sometimes I will pause videos and take an image from that, that are from the module. You can also go to Wikimedia, and I can't remember what the actual website is. I just type Wikimedia into my DuckDuckGo search engine. And those, I like that because it's all royalty-free images. They're free, share and alike images that anybody can use. And if you do use something like that, just having a little line underneath it saying, this is from, or just in parentheses having the Wikimedia link is good enough. You don't need to put that on your citations page or anything like that. Does that help? Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. You're welcome. Anybody else have any questions?
I have one question. So for those like weekly reflections and stuff, does it have to be a specific piece that we like covered in class, or can we like find our own piece of art that like we're really interested in that's like in the same kind of like subject, kind of the same style as we're talking about, that like relates back to it?
That is a really good question. I think the answer is kind of, because at the very, very beginning, I want you to do your best to draw from the imagery that's in the module. Sometimes that can be difficult, but be very mindful if you do want to pull something out. If in the module we're talking about, for example, cubism, make sure that you pull an image that is cubism from the time frame that we're talking about, which is 1906 to 1920 about. The reason I say that is in another class, we were doing pre-Renaissance stuff, looking at classical India, and somebody did their weekly reflection on paintings on billboards in present day India. And that doesn't count because it's not from the module. Yes, it's from India, but it's not from that time frame. So Sarah, when you do yours, just ask yourself, is this something that is consistent with this time frame or this style or this movement that we just didn't happen to see in the class? And that's it. And there's going to be lots of opportunities like Bauhaus. We talk about Bauhaus, we're only going to see maybe a half a dozen houses, and there were literally thousands that were made, or mid-century modern, the same kind of thing, or prairie style architecture, or if we like Jugendstil, we're only going to see maybe a dozen paintings, and again there were thousands of them. So making sure that A, it fits the movement or the era that we're talking about, and B, it's from that time period. All right. And we're only going to look at maybe 6 artists. And again, there were hundreds in each of these movements, but the 6 artists are just the ones that are easiest to find. And that's primarily why they were chosen, not because they were the only ones. So does that help?
Yes, that was perfect.
Okay. Excellent. Now we're going to get started I went a little bit longer than I expected on that. So we may go through this other stuff pretty fast, but there are some major points that I want to talk about. This is pretty much the setup for the class. Excuse me. And we may watch a couple short videos. For the people at home who are not here live, sometimes YouTube will cut a video out because it, for whatever reason, it catches the eye of the copyright infringement algorithm. And if that's the case, I want you to see which one I'm clicking on inside the module so that you can watch it yourself, because it is important that you watch it. And this is an article that I really like. Tolstoy is one of my favorite writers. But in an essay that he wrote about art, he did refer to art as a virus. And he said our job as artists is to infect others. And there is a really good question about what is art. And some of the stuff that we're going to look at, you are going to really think to yourself, holy cow, this guy really pulled the hood over everybody's eyes, and baffled a lot of people, because this is definitely not art. Now, before we watch this, I want to ask you, how many of you have heard the phrase, beauty is in the eye of the beholder? That sounds like it should be etched in stone somewhere as an eternal truth, doesn't it? Do you know how old that statement is? 212 years. It was first written in 1812. That's when it was published. And I have heard people, prancing around on their educated laurels say, well, even Shakespeare was talking about this when he wrote Rose is a Rose by any other name. And a rose is a rose is a rose, even something like that, by any other name. Well, that's not what Shakespeare was talking about. What Shakespeare was talking about is that the quality of the rose remains the rose, regardless of the title given to it. If we find a book, a dictionary, and it's a dictionary on the Dene language, most of us are not going to be able to read that because most of us don't read Dene. But that doesn't mean that it's an invalid book. It is perfectly appropriate for the people that have the skill set and the vocabulary to read it. Beauty is a quality that is present in some things, maybe not so much present in other things, but our capacity to title something as beautiful does not make the thing beautiful. All it is a reflection of our perception and how we think about that thing. So I want, let that sink in for just a second. If beauty is only residing in the eye of the beholder, and two of us that hate each other look at the same thing, one of us likes it, the other one doesn't, the thing itself is not changing to meet the needs of the two observers, is it? It's staying what it is. Whatever qualities it has are there, and the people observing it are giving their labels to it. So if we don't think that something is art, that doesn't mean categorically it's not art. It may very well be art, and we just haven't developed the vocabulary or had the life experience to understand and appreciate it. Now, is there anything that you guys enjoy right now that 15 years ago you couldn't stand? For me, it's feta cheese and green olives. I used to hate feta cheese and green olives. I could not believe that anybody in their right mind would actually want to eat that without intending to throw up. But over time, that kind of made me upset that I would give so much of my freedom to an object, and decide to hate it. So I started training myself to eat them and keep them down. And now I enjoy all sorts of different olives. I enjoy lots of different kinds of cheeses. I even like eating fried mushrooms, for crying out loud. But the mushroom did not magically change. The feta cheese did not magically change. The green olives didn't magically change. Who changed? It was me. My ability to appreciate it, or my vocabulary of appreciation, expanded. And if you still hate green olives, maybe you disagree with that, and that's totally fine. But I think all of us, looking back, there are either people that we know, things we've experienced, books that we've read, things that we've eaten that 15 years ago we couldn't stand, and now we enjoy them. And most of the time, it's not because the object, the thing itself changed, it's because we change. And so I want you to keep that in mind as we go through. I'm going to give you a definition of art that is pretty much how I see it. Most of the time people say, well, art is paintings, or for example, sculpture is what you bump into when you're trying to get a better view of real art. I've heard that before. Albrecht Dürer is arguably the best dry point etcher from Europe in the last couple hundred years. I think he is, if not the best, one of the best. Dry point etcher, he's a phenomenal artist and an incredible intellect. He wrote an essay called The Pillars of Art, and we'll talk more about that at another time if anybody reminds me. But one of the things he said is that one of the principles that makes art art is it is an activity where we reach for help outside of our normal, everyday, ego-driven, limited self. And the word he used was spiritus, or inspiration. You could call that our higher selves. You could call that intelligence in the universe. You could call that our future selves or better selves. You could even call that inspiration from a god or a higher power, and that's fine. When we are doing things that are just specifically done to meet our immediate needs and meet our immediate egos, that is just doing stuff. But when we expand ourselves out and welcome and ask for help outside of that immediate tiny little window of experience, then it becomes art. And art is either the process of doing that or the evidence of the process. And so whether or not somebody else enjoys it doesn't really matter. If you're a kindergarten teacher and you are doing something that really expands the horizons of these little children in your care, you're an artist. If you dance or play the piano, if you farm in a field, anytime you do something where you get into that flow state and you use capacities that are outside of your normal, everyday, ego-driven self capacity, then you're producing something that qualifies as art. And there's plenty of times when people will do stuff that does not fit that mold that everybody does buy as art. You know, they accept the proposition that it's art, and it may not necessarily be art. It's the word I like to use is drivel, but and even then, it's hard for me to evaluate, is this drivel or not? Is it completely useless? Because I have this constant question in the back of my head: do I not get this because my vocabulary isn't sufficiently expanded to understand what's going on? And so there's this constant second guessing of my own capacity to be able to dismiss something as not being art. And I think that that is perfectly fine to second guess ourselves in that way, because we should open the door to the possibility that something that we don't understand could still be beautiful when we have developed the vocabulary to understand how that beauty is manifested. Does that make sense to people? And I think this is an important principle to have in the backs of our heads, because we're going to be looking at a lot of stuff in the 20th century that if you're anything like my grandpa, you can't accept as being art because it just doesn't look like it. And but I want you to keep that possibility open. Something else I wanted to talk about is how many people have heard the phrase, art imitates nature? Has anybody heard that phrase? It was very popular up to about 10 years ago or so. And that phrase, art imitates nature, was used to justify a lot of stuff that looks very naturalistic. And it comes from Plato. Plato mentions that in his The Republic, and in Timaeus, and in Phaedo, three of his writings. If you go to sacred-text.org, you can find a lot of those, the books that I talk about and stuff like that. A lot of them are on that website. What Plato actually said, the rest of the quote is, nature is a manifestation of the divine will, and art imitates nature. Suddenly, that opens the door really wide. If we just hear the phrase art imitates nature, then a tree, when somebody paints a tree, it has to look like a tree. And only the trees that we can recognize as trees count as art. And that limits it entirely. But when we realize that Plato said, nature is a manifestation of the divine will and art imitates nature, and we realize that Plato is agreeing with what Albrecht Dürer said 2,000 years later, which is art is something that is a manifestation of our will as we are manifesting the process of creation. When we're building something, when we're reaching the flow state, when we're reaching for something outside of our immediate ego-driven self, then we get into that realm, that somewhat mystical realm, when we are producing something that our normal ego self could not make. And that's what art becomes. So I don't think we have time to watch a lot of these videos, but I would like you to see them and just get from different perspectives on what art is. But my favorite definition is what Leo Tolstoy said. We referred to art as a virus, and our job as artists is to infect others. I love that. It's particularly creepy and disgusting perspective. But I give some of these are some of the writers who have talked about what art is and what it means. St. Augustine referred to the process, the desire to create, as the thumbprint of the creator on the human soul. That it shows that human beings were made by an intelligence that is beyond our understanding, because almost every human needs to make something, build something, create something. And whether or not it's building or creating in the physical world does not make any difference. That building could be farming in a field. It could be teaching children. It could be vacuuming a floor and taking pride in the fact that you're doing a good job vacuuming. That was one of my summer jobs. I cleaned apartments after people died and moved out. That was kind of, yeah. Anyway, another thing that we're going to be looking at is the difference between art periods and art movements. And I want you to watch this. We're not going to watch it right now. I think the voice is a little bit grating at times. If I've had a long day, I don't like the voice. But there are three there are three categories that are different between art periods and art movements. And the difference is space, time, and communication. An art period is generally going to be bound to a geographic location. It's generally going to be covering maybe up to generation or generations. And it's going to be dealing with ideas that are specific to what the self-identifiers a culture contains. What I mean by this is an art period, say, for example, Baroque as an art period, it lasted for about 100 years. It took place primarily in Europe, where people were interacting with each other, and it communicated the guiding principles that the majority of people in that culture at that time period in Europe lived by. And so, and that's what an art period is. An art movement, by contrast, is generally not necessarily going to be in a geographic location. It's going to actually be bound by people that have communicated with each other outside of the limits of geographic location. It's going to be anywhere from a couple years to 20 years. It's going to be generally a lot less than the generation, whereas an art period is going to could be several generations. Like Egyptian art is a period of about 2,500 years. And then you have Cubism, that is more of a period of about 11 years. And the third thing is, rather than being a manifestation of the guiding principles of the culture as a whole, it's going to be a response to the expectations of a culture. So those are three different things that separate out an art period and art movement. One thing that is going to be really frustrating, and I hope you guys don't get really upset about it, is that a lot of the times the language is used in art history is entirely arbitrary, because words like movement and period should be synonyms, but they're not. And if you get confused, join the rest of the 8 billion people on the planet. That's just the way it is. But generally, those are going to be the things that we talk about. So when I'm talking about art movements specific to 20th century art, I'm going to be talking about a movement that is going to be generally bound by a number of years. It's going to be less than a human generation, most likely. It's going to be covering perhaps artists that are from several different geographic locations that communicate with each other, either directly or indirectly. And it's going to be a response to an idea that is present within a society, as opposed to a manifestation of the society's overarching principles. Okay, does that kind of make sense to people? I hope so. If not, that's too bad. We're going on anyway. Now, one of the things, another thing I want to talk about is I'm trying to get a lot of this information that's bubbling around in my head out. So if you guys need to ask questions, please go ahead and ask. When I do the screen share, I can't see your thumbs or whatever, or your hands, I guess. And so please go ahead and interrupt me if you have a question. But if I'm going too fast, two ways to resolve that are, go through the module itself and look at some of these things, read it for yourself as well. But also you can ask me to slow down and stop, say, hey, could you go back and talk about this a little bit more? One of my favorite things to study is semiotics. Does anybody know what semiotics is?
Doesn't it deal with like symbols and how people like understand or like interpret symbols or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is. Semiotics is the study of contextual meaning, essentially. How do things mean? I was introduced to this as a way of understanding architecture. There are semiotics of architecture. And for example, feng shui is a really good expansion of the semiotics of architecture, because everything has a meaning within a home, and there are specific things that can be done to change the meaning, and there are specific rationales to express meaning. In a Western context, you go into a home, if you go through the front door, where do you expect that will open to? There's three possibilities. What are the three, if it's a front door, what are the three possibilities of the room that will be opened into?
Just like a living room or like a hallway, common area, possibly like the kitchen could be pretty close, but
Yeah, it's going to be like an entryway, a kitchen, or a living room. Is it going to open first? If you are going into somebody's house for the first time, this is the front door. Is it ever going to open into a bathroom? No. Is it ever going to open directly into a bedroom? Hopefully not. Ideally not. I lived in Alabama for a couple of years. The shotgun houses there, it was just basically a hallway, and you were lucky if that was not the case. But generally, in a Western home, it's going to be just exactly like you said, an entryway, a kitchen, or a living room, and we expect that, and that is kind of demonstrates the semiotics of architecture. There is a general meaning that can be understood, applied to the context of a living space. And the example that I'm using here is about when these objects were first discovered in the Cyclades in Greece. They were called idols because I am going to be critiquing archaeologists in the 1950s. Most of the way that we understand sciences today were established during the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment it was in many cases really good, but in other cases was rather ironic because it was very Eurocentric, with the idea being that the most enlightened people were those who were agnostic, and the most primitive people were those who believed in existing side by side with nature. And that's how the hierarchy of sciences is understood from that period of the Enlightenment. And so you look at this object, and of course they know that these people are primitive because this isn't very finely done. And of course, you can tell the very simplified features and the way the size it is, the way it looks so poorly rendered. The people were not very intelligent. They didn't know how to use their tools, and so obviously they were not great thinkers. And since they weren't great intelligent thinkers, they obviously were ruled by their relationship with religion. So of course this has to be an idol, and that's the rationale behind the understanding. Even though this is a way of thinking that is a holdover from centuries ago, this is how white archaeologists encountered these objects and labeled them 100 years ago. Think about the semiotics of the home. These are found in areas around inside homes, around fire pits, and there's going to be stuff like everyday detritus, like broken pots, sticks, pieces of string, plates. So it's obviously a living area in a home. How many of you can think of objects that look like stylized human representations that are about a foot long that are found in the principal living spaces of homes? What are those objects? Anybody? I had five daughters. I know what these objects are. What are they? This is the ancient Greek equivalent of a Barbie doll. Okay. And I can say that. I say that with some confidence because if this was found in a niche, wrapped in expensive cloth, in an out of the way area of the home, I could say, okay, that looks like it could be a worship altar. It looks like it could be potentially a worship space. But these are found in the blankets and the dishes and near the ashes of a fire in the space that everybody was trampling through in the home. That's where your kids' toys are all the time. So as a parent, I look at this and I see it as a little figurine. I see it as a baby doll. What's fascinating is these also are, if you look at these objects microscopically, a lot of these are found with tiny fibers, cloth fibers embedded in the cracks and with the faces painted, evidence of paint on the face. Are you going to necessarily do that with an idol? Well, you might, you could be, but I watch my daughters and I help my kids make clothes for their dolls all the time, when they were growing up. And you don't buy, there's very few dolls that you can get on the market today that don't have the faces painted. And so what do you think? If this is found in the middle of somebody's living room, people 3,000 years ago are not different from us today. The biggest difference is that they made temples that stood the test of time. 10,000 years after we're all gone, the world is going to be filled with cubic miles of disposable diapers. That's the biggest difference between us. And they love their kids. They like cooking. Guys went on dates with girls all the time. The people that lived hundreds and thousands of years ago are not dumber than we are today. They think the same. So when we look at art, think about that. Think about, how is this found? What is the context? And how does that reflect on the meaning? Talk about artifacts and symbolism. An artifact is an object that becomes important because of what it represents, and not that it symbolizes something specific, but that this is important because it represents a culture, and this is one of the few things that remains from that culture, and therefore it becomes an artifact. Now, if a shoe in our closet is just a shoe, something that we're going to throw at DI when we're tired of it. But in 1,000 years from now, if that shoe is the only thing that's left, it's going to become an artifact because it is the only thing that's left. Have any of you guys heard of somebody named Ibn Khaldun? He's one of my favorite writers. He's a 14th century Islamic writer. And one of the things that he talks about, he's considered to be the father of modern museology and the social sciences. But one of the things he talked about is objects are what they are because of the people that use them and because of the meaning that they imply. If you take that object and put it on a shelf so that it's no longer used for the purpose that it was, or on a pedestal inside of a museum, you no longer have access to that object as what it is. All you have access to is your assumptions about what that object could mean because it's out of context. Does that make sense? My sister is Shoshone, and she was one of these traditionalist beading artists, and she would make little moccasins for all the babies in the family. That I don't have mine anymore. Lost them a long time ago, which is really sad. But these are beautiful little moccasins that was a traditional gift for the sheep eater Shoshone in Nevada and Idaho. It is something that is designed to represent that the child is loved, so that the child knows that they're loved, but that other people know that the child is loved. And it also represents the potential abundance that the parents hope will come to the child's life. So when you find a pair of shoes like this in the foundation of a home for somebody, what that is saying is not what that is intending is it's a prayer for lots of children to come into the home. And then today you see these ghost hunter shows that will find these antique home, these 19th, 18th century homes. They'll find a hole in the wall. They'll find a little kid's shoe, and they'll say, "Oh, look, this is going to be haunted because of this and this." Well, that's probably not why the house is haunted. What's fascinating to me is what was intended as a blessing for the home, because a person didn't understand the context and took it out of context, now represents something that is completely different. Now it's creepy. Now it's eerie. Now it's awful. And I don't know, when I see a pair of these little gift they're blessing moccasins, essentially. They're prayer or blessing moccasins. And I see them in out of context pedestal in the middle of a museum. They're labeled child's moccasins. There's nothing in there that tells you this child was incredibly loved by its parents, by the other people in the family. Everybody in that area community that knew about these moccasins were praying with all their hearts that child would succeed and be healthy and happy. All that is gone because we've taken it out of context and put it into a museum. Do you see what I'm saying? That there is this, we have to be aware that there are contexts that give meaning to something. And that when that object or that thing is sometimes taken out of context, but it represents a whole volume of potential meaning, then it becomes an artifact. And then the third thing is symbolism. There are lots of different kinds of symbolism. Generally, symbolism is going to be something that represents something else. And it could be anything from the way a house is built to the colors a person wears. Symbol, it could be literally anything. 10,000 years from now, somebody finds a Cowboys logo. They're going to have no idea what it means, but they're going to know that it carries some symbolism. Now, sorry, I kind of got off track a little bit because I started rambling, and none of you were brave enough to put a pin in it to slow me down. But we're going to go ahead and go on. Let's see. I want to see how long this. Let's see. Okay, this is about 2.5 minutes. That might be a good one. This might be better. Main art movement. Okay, what we're going to do is we only have 60 minutes left. We're going to basically watch this really quick, and I'm not going to watch it with sound. And then we're going to watch just, I'm going to refer you to look at the main art movements later. So this was a brief 2.5 minute video about the history of art. And it gives you kind of a place for what we're saying, or what we're going to be doing. We're going to be dealing primarily with art from the 20th century. One thing that I think is really frustrating to me, and you will hear me say this over and over again, were there any people on the planet outside of the Mediterranean, Europe, and Eastern US? Have there ever been any other people on the planet? Anyone? Yeah. The planet has been full of people. But the art history that we generally look at is incredibly white man driven and Eurocentric. People don't realize that the ancient Han, as well as the Yoruba, were masters of bronze work over, easily 1,000, 1,500 years, even longer before the Renaissance ever caught wind of it. The Yoruba and the people in Nigeria were making photorealistic bronze castings that were life-size and beautifully realistic, incredibly detailed, 1,000 years before Michelangelo's parents ever met each other. And it's frustrating to me because when they were found originally and dated, they were dated back to the 1700s. Then somebody said, oh no, I think this is a little bit older. Then they were dated back to the 1500s. And for a long time, that was where they stayed. And then people started realizing, you know what, these anthropologists in Nigeria are right. This is a lot older. And that's when they realized that these things were made anywhere from 200 BC to about 400 AD. The difference is when the Yoruba heads were first discovered, it was by European colonists in Nigeria in the early 1900s. And if you are a colonizing power, it is incumbent upon you not only to train the people that you are colonizing, but to also have a stranglehold on the history so everybody knows that you are the supreme wisdom. You're the highest. You represent the highest achievement. Rudyard Kipling wrote a really lovely essay about the white man's burden, talking about that the pinnacle of human evolution is the white European male. And I don't know, when I say things like that, you guys aren't hearing all the sarcastic comments that are going on inside my head. But it's fascinating to me that people today, when we look at art history, there is still this kind of desire to make the things that don't fit into the narrative that we've invented out, to describe those things that don't fit easily as outliers, when those things that don't fit easily represent the actual truth. And I'm sorry for pontificating a little bit. It just gets me upset. So when we look at some of this stuff that we're looking at, and we look at things that talk about the history of art, generally, I want you to understand that that is the history as understood from a very Eurocentric point of view. It is, you guys know about European alchemists. You probably don't know about the Mayan alchemists that did follow the exact same principles and had dragons in their imagery for the same reason that the European alchemists did. You probably don't know about the incredibly advanced medical doctors in Central Africa that were practicing things like brain surgery and not cornea. What's the white cloud behind the iris? Cataracts. They were practicing cataract surgery. 1,000 years before Europeans ever thought about it. But we don't get that. We don't really get that kind of history. So I want you to watch those videos. I just get too upset when I watch it myself because generally the art history that we see is they're not intentionally trying to give us a lie, but it's not from a very fair perspective. So I'll just say that. I do want you to watch that. I'll give you a little bit of context. And then do definitely watch the main art movements, this video. There were a lot of art movements. And you will notice that art periods were lasting generations up until the beginning of the 1800s. And then after then, instead of art periods, it started translating into art movements, and they were growing shorter and shorter and shorter for two main reasons. One was that the Industrial Revolution made it so that everybody could afford stuff that they couldn't afford earlier. So artists no longer had to cater to an elite few. And the other thing is that art supplies became absurdly cheap. I can't remember his name. I want to say Rodin, but it wasn't Rodin. But one of the artists at the very beginning of the 1900s said that paint in tubes made the Impressionists possible. And what he was talking about is because of the Industrial Revolution, people could actually make paint in large quantities, put them into tubes that could then be transported all around the world at a fraction of the cost of what making your own paints was. And because a lot of different artists were catering to a lot of different people that wanted a lot of different things, and materials to make art were so cheap, those two things coming together made it so that people could finally start expressing themselves. And that's why we get a whole bunch of different art movements. So that basically summing those up, but watch those when you can. And we talked about this. I've kind of dribbled on quite a bit. there are a lot of different media that we'll look at. And I did talk about the 4 tools of artistic critique. Artness of a medium is always something that people debate. Have you guys ever heard about arguments about why photography is an art and why photography is not an art? Have you guys ever experienced those kinds of debates? And I think more recently, AI is a medium that a lot of people debate. Well, can AI art be actual art? And well, the answer is absolutely yes. Everything can be art. If you're peeling potatoes all the way to taking off roofing tiles, it doesn't matter. Everything can be art. Remember, because our definition of art is when you reach outside yourself. How many of you have experienced that flow state where you lose track of time? Okay, Jen has, Derek, Sarah, you have. We all reach that state. And when we reach that state, we are so hyper-focused on what we're doing, we are excluding our ego-driven, time-sensitive self from the process. And what we are doing has become art. And sometimes that flow state can be achieved as simply as listening to music or being part of an online video game, as well as when you're painting or photographing. It doesn't matter. Whatever that activity is, when you hit that flow state, that has become art. And so these kinds of arguments, I just think they're kind of silly. And I'm sorry I say that if people get offended about it, but the medium is not the thing that dictates the art. The thing that dictates the art is the activity, and what the kind of energy that went into that activity. And this is an excellent video. I'm thinking we will watch that next week. Who decide what arts means? There are 2 competing arguments. One is it only the viewer or is it only the artist? But I'll ask you, where do you think the meaning of art resides? And think about that for just a second. And I'm going to give you my opinion. My observation is that the meaning of art is something that grows and happens as we encounter art. Every time you encounter something, you rarely remember what the thing is. What you're remembering is your responses to the thing, how the thing makes you feel. And almost immediately, your brain starts cataloging all your responses, comparing that with the thing that you encountered, the description part of the process, and starts generating, because we have to. In order to understand our experiences, our brain starts generating connections, and we can't help it. So the meaning of something develops starting from the moment that we encounter it as this kind of organic interlacing between the object itself and our response to everything that we encounter, memory-wise, and all the connotations that our brain starts associating with that thing that we encounter. And this happens immediately. It happens very fast. And so the meaning is, I think, comes from that process, and the meaning is becomes a collaboration between the person that originated that and how we respond to it. On some level, we're creating an avatar of the creator of whatever this object is, and we're holding some sort of a nonverbal articulated conversation with this this imaginal being that represents the maker of that art. And from that conversation is where the meaning emerges. And I think that's really a fascinating thing that we rarely even talk about or think about. But you look over Jen's shoulder at the Christmas tree there, and whatever that thing is, it could be something that is randomly printed out that my brain is just interpreting as a Christmas tree, but it is spontaneously generating all sorts of connotations and reactions inside my head, bringing back memories. And because of all those things, the interlacing of all those thoughts, I am getting a picture of meaning that is developing in my brain that may or may not have anything to do with the intentions of whatever that object is, when or the intentions of the person that set that object up. And it has very little to do with what other people might think about it, but the meaning of it is generated by that process inside of my brain. And I'm holding a imaginary conversation. Jen, did you set the tree up? It was you and other people. So I'm holding a conversation with my imaginary image of Jen and her family creating that tree. And that's for me where that meaning resides. And I think that this is, it's difficult to communicate that, but the meaning of art, if somebody asks you what something means, because that meaning resides or is birthed in that space between you and the object that you encounter, that meaning might be shared by a lot of people. A lot of it might overlap with a lot of other people, but that meaning is going to be uniquely yours. And if you're ever in an art class where somebody grades you on whether or not you were right or wrong talking about a meaning, I don't think they're using correct language to describe what they want from you, because the meaning is uniquely yours. When you apply the tools of artistic critique, what I want you to gain from that is a confidence in your own vocabulary to be able to express why you have generated that meaning. And as long as you are able to confidently describe or share with somebody else why that particular set of meaning for you, why you've developed it, and what it means to you, then you're right. Do you know? Do you understand what I'm trying to say? If you are able to communicate the whys and the specifics of why you have that meaning in your head, then you're right when somebody asks what it means, because it does belong to you. Anyway, that's blah blah blah. Who cares? Nobody's listening. That's fine. Whatever. We're going to talk about a couple other things, and I think I'm going to double back and revisit some of this module for next week as well, because I needed to cover some of this other material. And we're at the end of our class time together. If you guys gave me another half an hour, we cover the rest of it, but I promised an hour and a half. Unless are you guys interested? Is anybody willing to stick around for another 15, 20 minutes? Derek is trying so hard to say hell no. Okay, then we're gonna talk a little bit about that next week. But I do want you to go through, watch all the videos that you possibly can, and see if you kind of understand the kinds of things that I've been talking about. But this is the setup. And next we're going to talk about what are the immediate factors that went into producing the environment so that 20th century art could be born. And generally, when I'm talking about 20th century art, I am sadly going to be talking about 20th century art predominantly in the Western Hemisphere. And there is a lot of really good 20th century art that I'm trying to address from other parts of the world, but that's predominantly what we're going to be talking about. The last thing is to get full attendance credit. Whether or not you attend live or watch this video on YouTube, either way, what you'll do is submit 5 things that you learned from today, and it could be that my shirt looks like a hobo patchwork quilt. It could be that we spend a lot of time together and you didn't hear a lot of talking about 20th century art. And it could be that you never heard the word semiotic before. And that's fine, whatever it is. It just needs to be 5 things that represent moments of your experience during the class time together. All right? Does anybody have any last questions before we wrap it up? Okay. As a reminder, we're going to do this again on next week on Thursday again. And then after that, we're going to be switching to Tuesdays for the rest of the semester. If you can come live, I really appreciate that. It helps me in my presentations. And if you're unable to come live, attend live, that is totally fine, because you'll get the same amount of credit watching this as video. All right. I hope you guys have an absolutely wonderful week. Please go through, and if you struggle a little bit with this first weekly reflection, that is totally fine. You may get only 15 points out of 25, but I will tell you why, and you just have to revisit it, and then you'll turn it in and get a perfect paper. And perfect is something else we'll talk about next week, but perfect is actually a synonym for finished. It is not a synonym for it looks like it was made 30,000 years in the future by Japanese nanites. That has nothing to do with it. And as people that are interested in construction, building, content creation, artistic endeavors, we are always our own worst critics, and we think, oh, it has to be perfect. Perfect just means you're finished with it, and that's it. It does not mean that you can never improve. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. All right, folks, I will look forward to seeing you next week. I hope you have an awesome weekend.